chances that you will be disappointed are very high. Well, first of all, just a moment of polite but sincerely felt thanks for this invitation. It's wonderful to be here, not only because of the blue sky, which doesn't happen often in Oxford, but especially because I really want to congratulate everyone involved in launching ADAPT. When I came to know about ADAPT, I thought, oh, goodness, I'm a philosopher, I know that I don't know, but this is big, how come I never heard of it? And then they said it was officially launched last week, so okay, well that's fine, so I'm safe as a student. But I promise in front of everybody and the camera that if there is a chance of interacting with you here from down there at the bottom of England and the other place called Oxford, I will be privileged. So I hope that this is the beginning of our fruitful interactions. Now with that aside, because we're not going to talk about business in the next half an hour or so, which reminds me that I better check what the time is. Yes. In the next half an hour, I'd like to talk about RTBF, the right to be forgotten issue. Now, I'm sure you have heard a lot about that, and I'm very happy to answer questions at the end of the session on more intimate issues, especially if the camera will be off, and tell you what really went on behind the scenes. But until that moment, what I intend to do is not to tell you what it is and how we got there and what decision we've taken and how the parties interacted with each other, because I take that to be largely well known, and if not, there's a reason why you don't know, because you don't care. I mean, so that is to be put on one side. What I like to do is to analyze why it is important, over and above just the debate about that single individual in Spain who didn't like that particular piece of news in the newspaper and asked the local court, and then went all the way down to the European Court of Justice and had to force Google to remove the links to that little piece of information in a Spanish newspaper that I had never heard of until the bomb exploded. So why is that important? In order to do that, some simple slides, but one premise for the occasional philosopher in the room, if there is one. This is a wonderful time to be a philosopher, because it's a mess. It's a total mess. It's like lawyers in town. You know the joke, one lawyer dies of poverty, but two lawyers, they become rich. Now this is similar in philosophical context. A mess like this is so messy that someone like Google decides to ask a philosopher for advice. Now that is as messy as it gets. When you start thinking, the lawyers are not good enough. We need to ask a philosopher. No, it's the last resource. It's like, well, you don't know what else to do. I mean, as they say in other contexts, it's like going to the dentist. You try not to go until you really have to. And that's philosophy for you. We do philosophy when we have to. If we were to do philosophy when we can and we have the leisure to do it, we wouldn't be getting in that mess in the first place. It's only when you really have that painful moment in the morning and it's like, okay, let's call the dentist because it's time to have that tooth removed, that you call the dentist, quote unquote, a philosopher to get to the bottom of things. Now, so it's a mess, it's a conceptual mess. So anyone you might have heard who's told you, in this as in other cases, including the safe harbor that the minister referred to, that, oh, it's a technicality. Let's get the engineers and the lawyers around the table and we will solve it. That person does not know what he or she is talking about. It's a conceptual mess, which means that you need conceptual design to resolve the problem. And conceptual design is what philosophers and politicians, two capital P's for once, do best. Philosophers and politicians are experts in conceptual design, things that are constrained by facts and maths. They are in this open space where you need to find an agreement. You need to see the pro and contra. You need to see how much it's going to cost, quote unquote, in terms of implications if I go this way rather than that. So that is the context in which we are sort of operating. Now that is a long premise to go down to some business for the next 25 minutes or so. I will make 10 points, and you're not supposed to be able to read this because each point will be expanded. So lucky the ones in the first row, but if you are down there, you're not supposed to be able to read this. At the center there is the right to be forgotten, and I will point out, and I tried to make them organized around 10 so that there's a bit of a chance that one may remember 10 fingers, 10 points, not quite sure what they were, but he had lots to say around this issue. Each of them would require a whole lecture to be seriously analyzed, not discussed, not resolved. So if you have a taste of a bit of an appetizer, well, that's exactly what it is. And you understand why there's a Google committee on this, why the European Court of Justice got involved, why it took us 7 meetings in 7 capitals in Europe just to get to the bottom of things, of what the problem really is about. So you know about the right to be forgotten, and for those of you who have been on holiday for the past 2 years on the moon, it's that story that I told you about Google being forced by the European Court of Justice to remove links to a particular piece of information that concerned a Spanish citizen for something that was legally, this is fundamental, legally published a long time ago. It was published because the court local in Spain had dictated that the piece of news, namely the appropriation of some couple of flats really downtown, had to be publicized in the local newspapers to make sure that they would sell at the best possible price. So we're talking about legally available information that is no longer accessible if you are in Spain, in fact if you are in Europe, through Google, because those links have been removed. What's the big deal? Well, first of all, the first thing that became quite clear during the debate is that we are confronting a fundamental clash between 2 human rights. Now, there's a very naive view that it normally comes with temples in mind, like Greek columns. That if you have a Greek column here, another Greek column there, another Greek column there, these are fundamental rights, they can't clash. They all sustain the building. Well, I'm so sorry about that metaphor, but that is so not the case. These are fundamental rights, the privacy on the one hand, defended by the European Court of Justice, and freedom of speech, defended by the more American view, especially Google in this case. These are 2 rights that for a long time were like 2 friends you never had a chance to get together in the same room. You discover that they don't get along. And that's so unpleasant. That's what technology has done for us. They've been with us for a long time. You got references to privacy in Augustine, the saint. So it's not that we have started talking about privacy yesterday. And yet, this privacy and freedom of speech never came to clash so badly. So again, if you read anywhere that someone will tell you, oh, of course they cannot clash, there is no disagreement. These are fundamental rights. No, these are like salt and pepper on the one hand and sugar on the other in the kitchen. You don't want to mix the salt and the sugar, the fundamental ingredients, but they don't agree in the same cup of coffee. So that was the first, and in fact with us, still the main problem we have when having a dialogue transatlantic between the European Justice on the one hand and Google or any other company on the other. If you privilege freedom of speech, you want to make sure that any company has the right to link anything online that is legally available online. And to be fair, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this stuff is out there, has been published legally for legal reasons, and I cannot link to it. On the other hand, there's the view that, well, it's about privacy, and when do we come to an end in the process of having something constantly regurgitated by these internet engines that search all over the place, fishing with bombs in the lake? That's not picking just the right bits of information. It's regurgitating everything that is out there. So it might be legally available, or maybe it needs to sediment nicely. It used to when the analog was running the business, not the digital. Today the digital writes this endless front page that never comes to the second page. It's always out there. So that's the first problem, and that is clearly a fundamental issue in philosophy of law. I mentioned already the second one as by the way. There's a fundamental distinction that we have started appreciating between available information online, it's there, and accessible information online, it's there, and I can get that information easily. Now, you're saying, oh, that's a big deal, we don't need a philosopher for that. Well, if you are a little bit more careful about this distinction, you start realizing that there is an important shift that neither the European Court of Justice nor Google want to acknowledge, because it's an inconvenient truth. Imagine that your search engine is the map and that the information online is the territory. We grew up as a culture for millennia, and certainly since Gutenberg onwards, thinking that it was the territory that mattered, and the map was more or less good, but as long as you had the territory, in other words, as long as the books were in the library, well, the catalogue may or may not be good, but no, the books are in the library. Today, in the internet age, we have shifted what matters and what makes a difference. If you control the map, it doesn't matter what the territory is. When we interviewed in the various consultations people from The Guardian, they were begging anyone in the room to have a saying in what was going on, because they made clear, and it's all on record, you can find it on the web, on the website of the committee, saying any access to our database or past articles is virtually achieved through Google. You remove those links, it may as well have never been published. Nobody would ever find it. So forget about, oh, we're not touching the territory, we're just touching the map. So the European Court of Justice, well, this is not censorship. We're not removing the content. We're just removing links from the search engine. I'm afraid, welcome to the 21st century. If you erase any bit from the map, the territory disappears with the map. Google, oh, we're just providing a library catalog. We're not touching the territory. Seriously. You, the owner of the map, the one who decides what is and what is not accessible. So both they like to talk Gutenberg way. They both like to talk availability for one or the opposite reason. They're not really facing the real problem. Who is in charge? Oh, this could leave us dissatisfied even if we spend the whole day discussing it. Quickly, at the moment, if you want to have your information de-linked by a search engine, especially Google, since Google, thanks, I'm afraid, to some political decisions in Brussels taken at the wrong time in the 90s, is actually the only search engine you have in Europe. We don't have real competition. Well, if you have the search engine that dominates accessibility to information in what we define as the information society, so we gave them the key, 100%, well, who is really in power today? Well, Google is. And who put Google in power? The European Court of Justice. Deciding that it is up to Google to listen to requests in the first place and decide whether these requests are acceptable or not acceptable. That's a disaster. I don't like the idea that it's Google who decides. I would like to see the Data Privacy Agency, local, in Ireland, UK, or wherever else. That is the sort of really responsible, really accountable entity that should decide. Google may or may not decide. So far, I have to say, fair enough. So far, so good. Everybody seems to be fairly happy with the job done by Google. But if the attempt was to remove Google from the loop and make sure that we citizens would reacquire control of on our information, well, we should have been giving that control to citizens through institutions, not through a business that is based in California. So the big fight today, through the right to be forgotten, but safe harbor is the same, the new digital regulations coming are part of this big wave, is who is going to be the new power in the 21st century information society? Are we going to let business run even the socio-political context, or do we have the socio-political institutions up to the task to play the right game? And mind that it's entirely up to us. We don't know. It's happening as we speak. And as we heard in previous presentations, there are sustained efforts from both sides to make sure that someone wins together. The problem with the territoriality versus physical logical space of the right to be forgotten. Well, this is a classic. For those of you who are historians, you know that at least in Europe, we've been sort of quite happy with where we have solved the problem of who decides what, where, with a pretty simple solution. My place, my rules, your place, your rules. It took the 100-Year Wars, the Three Musketeers, if you remember, how it ends with Richelieu with a full armor. When they meet again, 20 years later, something has happened, and it's called Westphalian Peace. The Westphalian Peace make sure that all the religious war in Europe come to an end. And there's that kind of special piece, which is my business, my rules, your business, your rules, end of the story. That's called the Westphalian system. And that is what we have been enjoying as sovereign states for the past more or less 300-400 years, depending on how you count. Now that has come to an end, much to the disappointment of many philosophers of law, because, well, that is based on geography. The whole system was geography giving a hand to law and making sure the law could be applied all the way to the border. But you need to have a border, you have to have a river, the Alps, something. If that border is not there, as there isn't on the internet, how can France, for example, decide that a particular piece of information is no longer linked by a search engine, not only in Google France, but all over the place? Well, on the one hand, again, typical philosophical way of looking at things, well, it doesn't make too much sense to remove those links when all it takes is to go to google.com and get the stuff anywhere. That's a joke. But on the other hand, it's very hard to see how France being the last case in question, so it's not accidental, can dictate to an American company based in California what to do or not to do with its own search engine. It's not going to be solved that way. So there are ways of doing this, but maybe more during the Q&A. But the current situation is a situation of tension. When it comes to removing those links, there's a lot of algorithmic attempts to make sure that this is done quickly. One normal point made regularly, again and again, is that Google, for example, removes millions, not hundreds or thousands, millions of links by the bucket. And I don't give you the numbers, they change constantly, but you can see, find this again by Google online when it comes to copyright. The Millennium Act is such that they can remove these links when they are illegally there, pointing to stuff that has been produced illegally. No problem. Well, the thing is that most of that, the linking is done by automatic means. When it comes to my data, your data, my request to Google, is so personal, so individual. There has to be someone there. And the there is pretty much here. It's a big office with a lot of paralegals going through every application by hand. So what's the big deal here? Well, first of all, we start looking at what it means to have all those AI in place, as if there is no AI that can deal with that stuff. We don't even know how to build it. It's all in science fiction. People who need to sell books, need to get you scared to death because it's a dark room, just turn on the light. Is Hollywood. There is no AI solution to this problem because it's so individual and specific that it requires a human intelligence to be dealt with. Now, a little bit of details. Public figure. Part of the decision by the European Court of Justice was, well, the links should be removed unless the person in question is a public figure. If he is a politician, for example, he cannot apply, I'm afraid, for having the links removed. Because there is, what we shall see in the next slide, public interest. We say, oh, that's straightforward. Well, at least one piece of rule that we, as the committee, could stick to until you get a philosopher in the room. That points out that what it means to be a public figure is not clear at all. Now, the life of an individual may actually go up and down. You are not a public figure, you become a politician, you go back to your normal life, and maybe you are a politician again, and you go back. You're elected twice, at a distance of 10 years. What happens in the 10 years in between? Is that something that the public should be informed about? Well, I wasn't a public figure for 10 years. I was just a normal citizen. I was not re-elected. But then I became a public figure again. Can I apply for those links to be removed, or can I not? I say, oh, that's really nitty-gritty. I know, but it's a single individual life at stake. That person had felt so badly about that information to go through the painful process of applying for it. Do we really have a simple rule say, oh, sorry, no, you've been elected once, therefore your life has to be transparent to the rest of the citizens 24/7? I don't think so. So that is, again, a problem which we still have, by the way. Oh, but the solution is public interest, surely. I mean, if there's public interest, this word public interest is, again, unfortunately, very difficult to define. Is there public interest? No, back in the other place, back in, say, in Italy, to what happens to that particular businessman who has very dodgy past and even dodgy infractions when he was prime minister. well, there's a lot of public interest in the private life of that individual. Now, maybe that public interest is justified. Maybe you want to know. I might be, say, a Brazilian businessman. I want to know whether you have ever had any dealings with the justice. I want to know whether you have ever had your properties repossessed. Is that public interest? Well, if you were, then those links about the Spanish gentleman in question should have been left there. So what defines public interest, again, is not a matter of subtleties and jokes, it's a matter of single application, one by one, check whether that is there or not. There's something very important here which concerns also the interactions between UK, Northern Ireland as well. Unfortunately, in an analog world where we used to print stuff on paper with ink, there was this wonderful thing that information would sediment. Your pictures when you were young would become yellow, they would accumulate in a drawer, nobody could find them. Even my picture, dressed like a Robin Hood when I was 6 years old. And that's good, because my students would have a day they could see that picture. So, the slow accumulation of information was gradual. Nobody was erasing anything necessarily, but you didn't have easy access to it. That helped, not forgetting, but actually putting things in perspective. So if you think in terms of closure as the ability to remember without recalling, well, that's exactly the fine point that we have lost. Think so in terms of areas of conflict. Palestine. At some point, we need to stop recalling all the pain, all the deaths, all the terror, all the infinite number of things that we've done to each other. Not because we don't want to forget them, but we don't want to rehearse that as a story, as a narrative, as the way you live by. Oh, I still remember your grandfather and my grandfather. Yeah, can we put that in the archive? Because it's just now me and you. Now, with the right to be forgotten, in favor of the right to be forgotten, well, we need to regain that ability. If we constantly rehearse the past, and the past is constantly haunting us, it's not helping us as a springboard, becomes a stone around our neck. We stop developing. And some of the things that we saw during the panel were terrifying. There were individuals whose development had been absolutely killed by some stupid things done in the past, stuff that was 20 years old, that was regurgitated by a search engine, and that these two particular individuals, I still remember, a driver who had his driver license removed for drink and drive. He had a job that had nothing to do with the drive. 20 years later, he got in trouble because that piece of information came up again. A teacher, that was someone else in school, she had a less than fully dressed picture in MySpace, good old days, when she was young. The students found out through a search engine, plastered the whole school. She had to resign. Her life was destroyed. I mean, I remember interviews with these people, actually on the BBC, and thinking, we need to do something about this. This is insane. We can't just let business to be business just because, it's legally available online. Well, who cares? I mean, it doesn't matter. So we need to be able to reacquire this fine balance between keeping it there, but not having it constantly in front of your eyes. Relevance. This is a beautiful thing that actually our committee didn't get right. I fought very hard. Also some references, if you read carefully, in what we report online. The whole debate about should this information be linked or not is, is this still relevant? Well, as a former logician, I can tell you that there is a particular mathematical logic area called relevant logic, where we assume what relevance means. We know we cannot define it because it is impossible, at least to the best of our understanding today as logicians, because nothing is relevant or irrelevant outside a context and for a purpose. The train timetable is utterly relevant if you're up at the right station for the right reason, otherwise you couldn't care less. that piece of information about someone being in a particular place at that time becomes very relevant if that place was a suspicious place and the other people there were also suspicious. The police would be very interested. But it's totally irrelevant otherwise. There is no way of talking about absolute relevance. Now that was my line with Google and the European Court of Justice and other members of the committee. Didn't go anywhere. So I failed completely. And what actually passed was time, which is a total disaster. In other words, if this old is no longer relevant. If it's new, well, it's still relevant. So what I had this morning for breakfast is relevant. But whether I did or did not witness someone doing something really dodgy 15 years ago, well, that's irrelevant, it's old anyway. You can see that there's a rationale behind. Is the let things gone by gone. No, let things sediment. But this is the wrong way of doing it. But then again, we have a whole, right to be forgotten, big impact on a philosophy of time, a philosophy of relevance in the whole context. One more point, and we're almost there with my half an hour or so. Data processing. I became rather suspicious about what really this means. You know, Google was considered to be an entity that was doing data processing. Well, it's actually links to information, so in what way are they processing data? So I checked. And the legislation is not clear at all. The UK government issued a small booklet to explain what they mean by data processing. It's about 30 pages. And you read through that and you realize that it's quite simple. Anything, whatever you do with data, is data processing. So consider the following everyday example. You are at the supermarket. You pick up a can of beans. You read what is on the can. That's data processing. You're reading it. You pick up the can and you take it to the counter. You scan the code. That's data processing. The code gets to the database. The database collects that code. That's data processing. Puts that code together with all the other things you bought. That's even more data processing. Builds a profile. That's data processing. Prints that profile. That's data processing. Sends that printed stuff to someone who wants to sell you more beans. That's data processing. They said, you got a story. Surely there's a difference between me looking at something, a scan, reading a label, someone building a whole profile, something using it for... No, we have the data processing umbrella covering the whole thing. Now, what's the insane thing here? That data processing was defined at a time when we had CDs. There are some people here who remember what that means. Like, we had cassettes. I mean, it was a world where you actually were going downtown. There was a shop where you would be renting movies. You remember that? And you had 3 days to return them, like middle age. But that was the time when we actually started shaping our legislation at the European level for this sort of issues. Now, I'm not saying that that was not a good idea, and it was a good job, but does it need to be updated? Oh, yes. So that we make a difference between someone who is providing links online to information that is already there, and someone who's building a whole profile. It might be easily the same someone, but in different contexts, and is selling that profile to someone else, maybe an insurance company, who knows that now you're eating way too many beans. So this is essentially the right to be forgotten quick overview. What I try to convey to you is the following message. The right to be forgotten in and of itself is a big deal, but it's not such a big deal in the big scheme of things. In and of itself, it's a bit of a spark, as I use in my title. The thing is that it's an important spark because we are seeing an explosion of other issues around it. We're talking about what it means to have ethically a way of putting things away so that peace and reconciliation can happen. Well, that's also right to be forgotten. We're talking about having what philosophers would be calling in philosophy of science or epistemology a clear understanding of what it means relevance and time and what's the importance of these issues when it comes to handling information online. We're talking about philosophy of politics. Who is going to have power? Which are the grey powers behind the official powers that are influencing our decisions? We're talking about two different cultures in terms of privacy, one kind versus the other, one as a human right, the other one as a social sort of engine. America versus EU, and we're also talking about the conflict between two fundamental rights, which so far hadn't come hand to hand. Freedom of speech versus privacy. So I could go on, but I think you got the picture. Essentially, this is the point of view through which you can analyze a number of issues that are coming to maturity. Now, what needs to be done next, seems to me, is unfortunately a lot of work. One thing needs to be avoided, and I'm coming to a conclusion, trying to adapt all solutions to new problems. As long as we think, as unfortunately a lot of aged politicians tend to do, that, well, it wasn't so bad so far, so we just adapt, no, the old solution to the new problems, kind of 2.0, 3.0, no, forget all the numbers. This is something that is sufficiently new to require new thinking. So that's the past pedestrians, the negative side. Let's not try to adapt all solutions to new problems, because these new problems need real serious rethinking. Think of Westphalia. The second thing is, maybe what we need to get out of all this is a lesson of extreme determination to find collaborative solutions across the Atlantic. Now, this is easier to say than to do, but as long as we don't put the governments in question, as long as we have a debate in this particular case between a court of justice and a company, as opposed to the European Union and the US government, we're not going to get that transatlantic agreement on, for example, the right to be forgotten, which is not going to go anywhere. Now, it's going to take a long time. The analogy here is just an analogy, is the effort that it took for decades to find the right legal framework for the law of the sea. There was a lot of empty space out there. People didn't know how to handle it, but we got there. There was interest, and the governments, put together, they came to some decent conclusions. There are still people who breach that law, China included, but it's not that we don't know how to handle it. So don't get confused. I mean, one thing is not to know what's right and wrong, and the other thing is to know exactly what to do when things go wrong and how you handle it. We are at the first stage. We still don't know exactly what's the right solution, but we can put these forces together. So to conclude, the future is where the past happens again. With a shift, we need to focus on the shift. Thank you.